How's it going, guys, and welcome to Our Ranch. So pretty exciting video that I have been putting a ton of time and effort and coordination into producing. If you're like me and you enjoy various nighttime activities, whether it's hiking, camping, hunting, etc., well, you've probably looked into different illumination devices to help you with those nighttime activities. You've probably also noticed that it's very hard to get a direct comparison because you got a few in one video, then you got to try to compare to another video, and it's not apples to apples in terms of lighting conditions, etc. I have an engineering background. I'm actually currently an actively licensed professional engineer in the state of Texas, so I'd like to believe that I have at least a decently solid fundamentals on engineering controls. So this video is going to try to give you the best possible baseline comparing all these against each other, as well as actual data and measured analytics that I will share later in this video as well. So skip around to what you may be most interested in. So if you appreciate the amount of time and effort that was put into this video, I just ask that you consider subscribing to the channel. It's not going to cost you anything, and all it's going to do as the subscriber count goes up on the channel is encourage other companies to potentially partner with me to send me more devices like this so I can only get bigger and better in terms of the videos I can produce for you. That would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you can share this video, comment, like, whatever you can to appeal to the almighty YouTube algorithm, that would also help me and the channel out as well. There is absolutely no way I could have put this video together on my own. So shout out first and foremost to Armasight. Armasight as a company has been supporting night vision content on the channel. Whether they benefit or not from what is included in the videos, they are happy to support me putting together and collecting data like this for the good of the night vision community. So Armasight as a company is doing awesome things for the night vision community by helping support content like this. So huge shout out to Armasight. As many of you know, devices like these can be kind of hard to track down. They can be rare, hard to source. The guys at Vital Endeavors are absolute godsends in terms of trying to track down and source these kind of devices. So if you are trying to track down something that is hard to find, or you just want some general information about what device might be right for your use case, I highly recommend you reach out to and get in touch with Vital Endeavors. Great group of guys over there. Next shout out goes to 3EIR. Definitely couldn't have done this video without them either. They were very helpful, and those guys are absolute geniuses when it comes to knowing the ins and outs of the engineering of lasers and devices like this. They were very insightful and very helpful and just wanted to support me in getting the best possible data for this video. So they were absolute rock stars as well. I really appreciate 3EIR and shout out to them. And last but not least, believe it or not, I summon the power of Reddit and different night vision forums to try to get some more of these units from individual users. So shout out to you guys for helping do your individual part to support the video for the good of the night vision community as well. In fact, Yellowhammer Outdoors actually has his own channel. He sent in a device. So consider stopping by his channel and subscribing to show some love and support for him as well. Okay, so with all that out of the way, let's talk about the first test that I'm going to do, which I think is going to be what 90% of you are most interested in anyways, and that's going to be a visual comparison. So although the least scientific test, it will be somewhat useful to see how these things actually perform in a practical case. So I have different targets ranging from 50 all the way to 500 yards. At the 100 to 500 yard increment, I had a variety of targets, one being a darker colored and one being a lighter colored target. Now the targets are mounted to a 4x8 black backing, which I think you should see in most of the footage, but I wanted to point out the dimensions so you kind of understand the scale of things. Now at the 50 yard mark, I put a steel target up where I actually put a gray t-shirt over it, because at close ranges, especially with steel, it reflects a lot of IR light back at the night vision devices, and I wanted to make it actually maybe representative of, illuminating different fabrics or things that aren't metal. Now, I also initially grabbed some shots of the illumination pattern. Now this is gonna be done on my shed in the backyard, super scientific, but hey, it was a nice flat beige colored surface that gave us a decent view of the illuminator pattern. So I'll first show you the illumination pattern of the different devices. Now the ones that converge to a laser beam, I didn't take the time to record because it's just a blown out laser, but I tried to show you the widest setting. Now I point out that the shed is 8 feet wide because I was 10 yards away, aka 30 feet, and that means if the illumination pattern is wider than the shed at that range, it corresponds to a beam divergence of greater than 15 degrees. Some of them are going to be wider than that shed. I tried to stay consistent from the view angle and didn't try to get that whole thing within the shed on some of the wider illuminators or the ones that are just absolute flood. Okay, we have the L3 NGAL. This is dual low, and we have the illuminator as wide as possible. There's the 50 yard, pretty well illuminated. I'm going to put the diffuser over the laser, more usable aiming point. Diffuser back off that laser. So decent illumination at that 100 yard, kind of tapers off at the 200 on this low. I'm going to go ahead and diffuse that aiming laser one more time. So maybe you can make this work. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that beam pattern on that illuminator. So it gets pretty tight. So just a reminder, these are 4x8. Those back target backstops are 4x8s. Except for that one, it's a 4x8 right here. This is a little narrower, but so give you an idea of that beam tightness. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to widen it again, and we're going to kick it over to dual high. So yeah, definitely super bright, as to be expected. Pretty much lights up the entire 500 yard range. I'm going to put that diffuser over that laser, kind of get an idea. And let's go ahead and narrow. So definitely can see those 500 yard targets. No problem there. Way too bright up close. Now, while it is narrow, I am going to put the diffuser over the illuminator. Diffuser is also over the aiming laser, so this is dual high. I'm sure the tubes on the night vision we're recording through are definitely auto gating, but it does a pretty decent job flooding. So for comparison, off, on. So a lot of your foreground, not too bad. And here's that laser without our diffuser, just so you some reference there. So pretty strong device, and the weight to strength ratio, just how small, compact, and light this is, pretty impressive overall. I'll give you a mid-range beam. Now notice on this illuminator how it's not a super defined edge. It just kind of diffuses off. Not a super defined circle like I would have expected. There you have it, L3 NGAL. This is the InvisbleSight NGAL, as wide as you can get on the illuminator. This is dual low, 50 yard target, 100 yard target. I'm gonna go ahead and put the included diffuser over the aiming laser. Not too bad. Gonna go ahead and narrow the beam. So definitely usable to that 500 yard range, no problem. I can make those out. And keep in mind, this is gonna look a lot better to the actual user's eyes. You guys are losing a lot of value here looking at it digitally, but only so much I can do. Go ahead and widen that beam again. We're going to kick it up to the dual high. No diffuser is currently on. There is dual high. Pretty clean illumination. Not quite washing things out. This is as wide as it's going to go. So decent job lighting up that range. Go ahead and put that diffuser over the aiming laser. I'd say overall pretty darn usable. Let's focus this beam. It's too much for 50, too much for 100. Starting to become more usable, fully focused at the 300 yard range, and as to be expected, no problem at the 500 yard range. Now, while this is narrow, I'm gonna go ahead and put the included diffuser over the illuminator. A lot of foreground. Comparison off, on. So I'm not seeing much difference other than the foreground, but I'm looking through a camera. aiming laser, not diffused. Let's take a look at the aiming laser by itself. Pretty good lightsaber. Somogear NGAL. This is dual low, as wide as it's going to get. I cannot diffuse either the laser or the illuminator because this does not include diffusers. Definitely make out the 200-yard target, but the laser kind of overpowers it. Let's go ahead and narrow down the illuminator. Again, this is dual low. I'm going to go ahead and just switch to illuminator only, just because. Oh, there's not a illuminator low. Fortunately, it's dual or nothing. But so this is as narrow as it gets. I think this is one of the downsides to the Somogear. It's not overly narrow, so you can see at extended ranges it works. I mean, we can kind of make out that 500 yard, but the laser just overpowers it. I'm gonna go ahead and cap that laser. So there is low illumination. Now let's go ahead and go into illuminator high. So I can make out the 500 yard targets to my eye. Notice there's a little bit of artifacts outside the illumination pattern on this fully focused beam. A little overpowering at 100 yards. There's 200, 300, 400 on the left, and then 500 centered. Here is the 50-yard t-shirt. I'm gonna go ahead and widen. Notice that illuminator kind of cleans up. Super crispy edges there. So that is illuminator high. It's a 100-yard backdrop there. Kind of see some of those lighter colored targets popping out on those black silhouettes. And we're gonna go ahead and uncap the laser, and good God, it's almost too bright. So those of you guys that think you want the stupidest, brightest lasers, this is what you get. Just overpowering, it blooms. Not super usable when you get into these output ranges, personal opinion, but there you have it. I'm gonna narrow down. Okay, that was the Somogear. Okay, this is dual low PEQ 15. They're pretty clean illuminator. So this is almost just about best case. So put the diffuser over the laser. I guess it blocks it out. Maybe it's not a diffuser, my bad. So 50-yard target. By the way, this is as wide as that PEQ illuminator gets. Here's the 100-yard dual low. 200, 300, 400, 500, somewhere in there. Honestly, hard for me to make out with the current illumination power. Gonna go ahead and narrow the illuminator, and you get a fairly usable pattern at that 500. So I'd say on low, the PEQ 15 illuminator, kind of usable at that far range. You can see those silhouettes there. Definitely make out the 200. So this is probably one of the first ones on low that I think is somewhat usable. Let's go ahead and show you the low illuminator without the laser. So yeah, I can make out that 500-yard target. So pretty viable, just like I said, not super wide looking at that. So now we're going to step it up to high. So there is illuminator high. Keep that laser out. Yeah, we'll show you the laser. I bet it's going to bloom. Yep, too much. So we're going to cap that laser for now. Seeing a little bit of that petri dish effect that is very common for the PEQ 15. Kind of a more of a dead spot in the top left, but pretty clean illuminator. So we got a good demo unit. Shout out Vital Endeavors. All right, so you can definitely get stupid tight there. So really good long range option. I can definitely wash out targets even at the 500-yard range. So let's go ahead and uncap that laser, and just absolutely ridiculously bright. Notice the spill we are getting in the foreground. Just want to point that out in case it's not inherently obvious. Quite a bit of spill. Unfortunately, I don't have a diffuser on the Illuminator to show you that. But there is your standard PEQ15. I think even on the wide setting, it does a pretty good job illuminating those 500-yard targets. At least to my eye, through the camera screen, I can see them. Here is the Bigpeqs15 PEQ15 on low. Back it out. This one gets pretty wide. Right now, there's a lot of dead spots on the low setting. So this is dual low. Kind of got a little bit of an artifact there. So barely seeing any of that at 100. Let's go ahead and narrow. This Illuminator turns for a long time. There we go, I'm getting somewhere now. Still spinning. So there's that dual low. There is currently a diffuser over that laser. Let me show you without it. You see that laser a lot stronger. So on dual, this one, the Illuminator's got some pretty good dead spots. Just kind of got a vertical illumination strip there. I think similar to the actual PEQ15, you know, you can narrow it to laser beam and definitely see things further away. But let's get into dual high. So there is dual high. This thing is an absolute spotlight. Backing it out further, further, further. Yeah, put it. Let's go to Illuminator only. So you can see it without the laser blooming. I'll widen this. Illuminator. So on high, it kind of gets rid of those dead spots. You can see that your typical EEL style Illuminator Petri dish junk going on. Very typical for this Illuminator housing and an EEL laser based Illuminator. But it is bright and it gets pretty wide too. See if we can back it all the way out. I don't think it's really moving much there, but there is all the way out. I feel like I'm still getting some illumination out to the 300 yard. I kind of see the outlines of the 400 and 500 as well. Go ahead and narrow this Illuminator again. Bear with me, like I said, this thing spins for a long time to move his assembly. But so we're pretty much, I'm not gonna go too much tighter. It can go to a laser beam, but I think we're already washing out the night vision. So this one has quite a strong illuminator. Let's go ahead and show you that laser beam too. So no diffuser on the laser. I'm gonna go ahead and diffuse the laser. See if it makes it more usable. It's still pretty spicy. Very, very strong illuminator on this. The beloved Somogear PEQ15 on dual low. This is as wide as that illuminator gets, which I think is the biggest complaint for people that use this. So 50 yards, it's honestly not much wider. That silhouette is standing at about 6 feet tall, so you know, pretty close to man size, and it's not too much wider than that at 50 yards. So definitely not super usable up close. It's gonna be a spotlight. It's probably gonna auto gate your tubes a little bit. There's 100 yard to 300, 400, 500, kind of dropping off. Let's go ahead and tighten that illuminator. I'm not going to take the time to align the laser, so just going to keep it moving here on low. I can make out the 500 yard target. $50 yards, definitely overpowering. All right, let's crank her up to dual high. So dual high, as to be expected, you actually can decently illuminate. I'm gonna go ahead and just switch to illuminator only so that laser isn't blooming what we're looking at. You get the idea. Stupid strong lasers on the Somogears. Definitely see the 400 and the 500 yard target. Make out those steel targets a little bit. 300, 200, and definitely overkill at 100. So now let me widen the illuminator at 100. And honestly, reasonably clean. I gotta say, the Somogear PEQ15 does have a decently clean illuminator. 200 yard, 300 yard, 400 is visible, 500 is also fairly visible on the widest setting. So, like I said, gotta give it to the Somogear. Okay, we're going to be rolling into the 150 milliwatt MAWL. So here's flood. Not really making too much of a difference. So here is lowest power. This is the button closest to the user. I'm gonna call it the B button. Not seeing a whole lot hitting anything but the foreground. Here's the A button, furthest from the user. Now I'm getting a little bit more, but I would imagine it's definitely going to auto gate the tubes because it's so wide, so you're not going to get too much punch far away. So I'm kind of aiming upwards because definitely up close, I mean, your whole foreground is being illuminated. So I'd say not really useful even at that 100 yard range, but that 50, you're lighting everything up pretty good. Go ahead. Now we're in the middle selector position. Here's the B button flood closest to the user. A. Not really seeing too much difference to my eye. Okay, here is the higher output. On this MAWL, I don't know if the owner, if you can change the programming on MAWLs, but he's got it towards only laser. Here is the spot. It's definitely too strong for up close. Not totally washing out at 100. Here's your 200. Your 300. 400. 500. So I can see the 500. I'd say I could reasonably accurately take shots at 500. Not too bad. Laser only. There's the MAWL illumination at that 500. Now I'm going to immediately compare this to the 67 milliwatt output MAWL. So there's the 67 on the right, and here is the 150 on the left. To my eye, I am not seeing a difference. So if you happen to have a more recent MAWL and it says 67 milliwatts and you think you're getting substantially less punch at the 500 yard range, I am here to tell you you don't need to worry, because these both look about the same. On this 67 milliwatt MAWL, and forgive me guys for those that actually own a MAWL and have used it a lot more than me, I don't know if it's just customizable to the user I don't have the comparable mode on the 150 milliwatt, but on the 67 output MAWL, it has this mode that has flood and spot, and the concept is cool, except I can't really see the far range. So here's that independent flood, or spot rather, actually illuminates. But notice when we switch to this dual mode, you would think it'd be cool, but you're essentially auto-gating your tube and preventing you from really getting much use out of that dual mode. So the thought was there, if you didn't have a tube that auto-gated, I suppose, but most of us do. So again, here's that spot. Here's that kind of medium spot and flood mode. So I'd say not inherently useful for long range, but I guess if you're trying to do like 100 yard, it's not terrible, but it really lights up that foreground to where I think you're gonna auto-gate. So here is a WADSN MAWL clone that does actually have an IR illumination, but it's pretty much a flood. I'm getting a ton of spill in the foreground to where I think it's not going to be much use past 100, and then you kind of run into that same thing where it's not focused enough, but I think you're going to auto-gate your tubes with how, I mean, it's got a decent output. I'm not denying that, but it's just the foreground is being so lit up that I think the tube's gonna auto-gate and you're not gonna see too much. And it's definitely got a very, very strong laser. Turn that off. I mean, super just spill. I mean, just a lot of flood. So there's the WADSN, the clone MAWL, and here's kind of that medium flood on the real MAWL, clone MAWL. I can't really compare them because the clone MAWL just floods everything, but in terms of output, real MAWL, medium, and WADSN clone. All right, this is the Raid X. Let's see, here's the widest illuminator. This is illuminator low. Not doing a whole lot, even at 50 yards. I mean, maybe you can say it's helping at 100. And then definitely falls off completely at 200. I'm gonna go ahead and narrow the illuminator. You can now kind of make it out at the 200. There it is at the 100. And honestly, it just kind of makes it more usable at the 50. So that's illuminator low. Here is dual low. Now we're getting that laser, which the laser is kind of overpowering that really anemic illuminator. So, and there's not really a diffuser for this to my knowledge, so that weak low illuminator, it's not super useful. Here is the aiming laser on high for the Raid X, which is honestly a better illuminator than the actual illuminator. Interesting bloom pattern on this one too. So there's aim high. So the laser is capable. You can definitely pick up the laser, which is to be expected at 500 yards. Let's see if just illuminator high. Let's see what we got here. Let's see if it's useful. All right, so Illuminator high. It actually can overpower at 50, that's good. I'd say it's usable at 100, 200, see targets at 3. And on the widest setting, believe it or not, you can actually make out targets at 500 and we can narrow. So although the low illuminator is not inherently useful, I think you actually got a shot of using this out to 500 yards for the Raid X. So pleasantly surprised. Notice the kind of spill at that 100. So looks like we're overpowering the night vision at 100. So let's see what the dual high looks like, if that laser is going to overpower it or not. Seems pretty useful there. Let's widen this for 100. Okay, so there's not a diffuser that really works with this, but you don't need it because here is illuminator on high with the laser power independently turned down on the Raid X. This makes it incredibly useful in my opinion. I think this combination is super, super useful. So here is 500 yard targets. The Raid X looks pretty good. It's actually a pretty usable laser. I'm actually pretty impressed by this unit, and you should be for the price tag. There's the 300, 400, and the 500 yard target. So I think it would be somewhat practical to try to take shots at 500 yards with this combination. Not too bad. The independent control of that laser is probably the biggest perk to the Raid X. It has a very smooth illuminator divergence control, and this one is only about a quarter turn compared to some of the other ones. So it diverges or converges pretty quickly. All in all, pretty clean unit. Here's just the aiming laser. This one has very simple modes. So aiming laser, 50 yards, kind of overpowering. Getting a decent amount of bloom when it's just the laser by itself. So we're gonna go ahead and switch it to, here's illuminator only. Pretty bright up close. Sorry, it's illuminator and laser. Going to temporarily turn the gain down on this PVS-14 so you can see this illumination pattern. So definitely useful out to 500 yards, no problem. It's also definitely usable up close. It's going to be hard to tell, but you do have that kind of tight square-shaped illumination pattern, but you get a decent amount of spill, and I know it's hard to tell through the camera, but it's actually lighting up the environment in front of me pretty well. So absolutely usable to 500 yards. Here's the 400 yard target, 500 yard, 300, 200, and 100. Not that that laser was overpowering things, but here's the illuminator only. Definitely usable out to that 500 yard range. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the dual mode because this thing comes with an included diffuser for the illuminator, so if you need it for close range, boom. Pretty well balanced laser power and flood. Very much usable to 100 yards. I'd say even with the diffuser, probably 150 yards. That 200 is definitely visible. So here's without, super, super dark. And with, we can see 200. I can even make out the 300 yard. So I'd say close range, you're covered. And then with just a flip of this diffuser, boom. If you need to punch out further, you're good to go. But I actually really, really like the way this diffuser works. They did a very solid job at coming out with the right combination without overcomplicating a laser unit. Okay, this is the almighty DBAL D2. That seems to be most people's suggestions on the best civilian laser. This is dual low, as wide as that Illuminator gets. I will go ahead and put the villain weapon system diffuser on. So there you go. Just floods everything, especially with that Illuminator being as wide as it can go. Here's 100 yards. Kind of falls off. I'd say falls off between that 100 and 150. Let me narrow the Illuminator. I'd say when this is mounted, it's probably not the easiest Illuminator to work with in terms of converging it. Pretty stiff. So on low, you can make out that 500 yard target. Definitely the 300 without. And here's with. So not a whole lot. Let's go ahead and switch it to Illuminator high. Here's dual high. So this is why I actually don't mind the civilian lasers, is that gives you a pretty nice, precise aiming dot. So this is dual high. Yes, I know the laser's not centered. I've never even mounted this unit. It was purchased just for this video for you guys because this is a very common comparison point. So sorry for those with OCD, but bear with me. Here's the 400 and 500. You can definitely make out that 500 yard target, and that laser's not blooming. So this is a pretty useful combination. It's gonna absolutely overpower at 100. So you'd want to dial that back, get it more usable. Not too bad there. Adjust the PVS-14 gain. I think I'm a little hot right now. So pretty usable at 100. So Illuminator as narrow as it'll get, and here is the Villain Weapon Systems diffuser. So with that Illuminator on high and narrowed, here's what you get. So this is probably a 50 yards and in terms of its usefulness. Here's the 50 yard target. So I would recommend picking up a diffuser if you're going to use the laser up close with that diffuser, or with the illumination diffuser. So this is what you can expect. Here it is again at the 500. So everyone kind of pitches the DBAL D2 because it is pretty good for a civilian combination. It's just big and bulky. Comes with some of your classic Steiner issues, but overall not too bad. All right, here's the DBAL A2. This is a full power unit. Here's Illuminator on low. Nothing too impressive. Barely helps at that 50 yards, so negligible effect on 100, and definitely not great beyond that. Go ahead and narrow down the low power Illuminator just to see what we can get out of it. These can pretty much narrow to laser beams. So now you can see you're getting a little bit of a silhouette at 200. Little use at 300, maybe 400, but overall not overly impressive. There is high. See that petri dish? 50, 100, 200, 300. I can kind of make out the 500. Now when I switch this into dual high, that laser just gets absolutely stupid strong. So for the sake of actually being able to see the targets, I'm going to go ahead and just put it back on Illuminator only, but wanted to show you that real quick. So now as you narrow some of these down that have that petri dish effect, it kind of cleans up a little bit. I'm going to show you the 500 yard. So though it's not the cleanest illuminator, it definitely is a usable illuminator. So it's already kind of overpowering. I can narrow it more, but you get the idea there. Very, very strong because it is a full power unit. Now just to show you guys, here's the illuminator basically narrowed down to a laser, and I'm going to show you the diffuser. Say probably a 40 yard and in. I'm getting a little bit at the 50, but not super useful. For its size and weight, it is a pretty powerful unit. Definitely packs a punch. 200, 300, 400, and 500 yards. All right, so here's the DBAL A3 on dual low. This is as wide as that illuminator gets, and a little bit of an effect, if any. The illuminator at 100, let me converge it as much as it'll go. So this is as narrow as that illuminator gets. The laser is definitely blooming and overpowering compared to it. So here is the illuminator as tight as it'll go by itself. Barely any effect at 100, negligible at 200. So illuminator low at 50, maybe a little useful. Let's go ahead and go to illuminator high. So here's illuminator high at 50, as narrow as it's gonna get. We'll widen it again. So there's as wide as it gets, 50 yards, illuminator high. 100 yards. I feel like the dead spot is mostly in the upper right on this illuminator, so I'm gonna use that bottom left. You get a little bit of effect at 100, and I'd say it pretty much drops off by 200, so I'm gonna narrow it as much as this one will go. There's illuminator low at, illuminator high, tightest beam at 100. A little bit of effect at 200, and pretty much drops off in terms of usefulness at 300, and I'm going to assume that dual high is not going to be inherently useful because the laser, as I suspected, kind of takes over. So 300, I mean, I can see the 300 a little bit with the night vision, but I don't think it's really much thanks to the illuminator. So this is really kind of a 100 yard and in terms of it actually being useful. It's not even overpowering at the 100, or sorry, at the 50. So it's not overpowering the night vision at 50 yards, then I think that kind of speaks to how strong the illuminator is, and that's not very strong. Okay, here's the Holosun LS321G. This is the illuminator on low by itself. 50-yard target, little bit of effect. Let's narrow it. I will say of all the focusing knobs, the Holosun's actually feels the best. You feel some actual gears and some teeth in there. And it's hard to turn, like it's got some resistance, but not like overly hard. I like it the best of all the units that I've tested so far. So there is the Illuminator. As wide as it'll go. Don't really see much at 100. Narrow, you see a little bit. So yeah, negligible effect at 100 on wide. So narrow, you get a little bit. Ever so little reaching to 200. And I'd say nothing by the time you get to 300 yards. The laser can be picked up at further ranges. So it's right now it's on the 500-yard target. Okay, this is going to be the PEQ 2 on dual low. At that 100-yard target currently, but we'll start at the 50. Pretty clean illuminator for the big brick that it is. I'm gonna go ahead and put the diffuser over the laser. Sorry, it's a pattern generator. I thought it was a diffuser, but still pretty cool. And just because we'll narrow the illuminator at the 50. So on low, you're gonna easily be able to overpower. Let's see what the illuminator on low can do. Even at long range, I'd say you can kind of make out those 500-yard targets. Definitely not a problem at 100. So on the widest setting, only a little bit is making it to that 100. So here's probably my favorite thing about the PEQ 2 is that it does have a mode where you can have low laser and high illuminator. I think this kind of speaks to how clean that illuminator is, especially for how old of a unit this is. Getting into the retro era. For those that were issued these, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be offensive, but these are now kind of collector's items. So reasonably usable at 100. I'm going to put the pattern generator just to kind of diffuse that laser a little bit. Pretty usable. All right, so now we'll tighten that beam at the 500, kind of overpowering that laser now. Let me take the pattern generator off and see if we can get that laser back. That's pretty usable. Not too bad. And this thing can keep narrowing. We're lighting up that 500 pretty well. And the laser is not overpowering, but let me show you guys. Widen it just a bit. We'll switch it to dual high. And boom, there's your laser beam. Put that pattern generator over it. Now it's pretty clear you're marking something. Kind of neat. I'm going to switch it back to dual with the laser on low so that we're not washing things out. I want to show you how tight the illuminator can get on this. Pretty much a laser in itself. I am actually a huge fan of the PEQ 2. Pretty useful. Bummer it is as big as it is, but overall, I'd say pretty darn useful. There is the PEQ 2. So the illuminator does narrow to be a laser beam in it of itself. Just get illuminator only for you. So pretty clean. That is as wide as the illuminator gets, which is a bit of a bummer, but you can still use it. Looks like out to maybe about 150 yards. On the wide setting, here's 100. Of course, if we narrow it, it's going to get more useful. So there is 100 yards. On low, if we narrow it to a laser, no problem on low getting out to that 500 yard target there. So I think we've covered low. Like most lasers though, we go to low and put it in dual. The laser is going to overpower the low illuminator. Pretty strong laser on the Laserspeed. So now we're gonna go ahead and put it back on illuminator and we'll switch it over to high. And there is the rather strong illuminator, as wide as it'll go. Kind of helping even on the widest mode, the 500 yard range. Bit overpowering on the widest setting at 50, at least at the current gain settings. And by the way, the PEQ15 that I'm filming through, I'm trying to set it to where we're not washing out what's in the illuminator. So there you go. Show you downrange. No problem when you can narrow this to illuminate things far away. So that's where this would be a pretty good option for a clip-on device. Needed to use this for that illuminator. It will do a pretty good job here, but like I mentioned before, typically the lasers are not balanced. And even though I can illuminate at far range, that laser is still just too much for effective use at long range. It blooms too much. 100, let's see if I widen it, if the laser becomes any more useful. It's a little too spicy there. This is a no moon night, so if there's a little bit more photonic barriers in the area, I think it would become more useful. It would cut down on some of that blooming. But for no moon, that laser is really bouncing back a lot of light. So Laserspeed LS-M3. Laserspeed FL-5. This is as wide as that illuminator gets. This is on low. 50 yard target. It's about 6 feet tall. T-shirt on a steel target there. So kind of get an idea of how wide it would be for man-sized targets. Kind of see it at 100 and then drops off by 200. So let's go ahead and narrow the illuminator. So now it's becoming usable at 200, and like most laser speed devices, they narrow to lasers, so you can pick it up as far out as the 500, no problem. So I'm gonna go ahead and back this guy back out. Here's dual low. Laser doesn't look the most balanced. It's a little too bright. Moonless night, you're getting a lot of that light bouncing back. Super, super dark. I'm looking into, to my naked eye, it's pitch black. So there's that. We'll go ahead and switch to dual high. So pretty bright. Hopefully you can see there's a little bit of artifacting bouncing around kind of right there from this illuminator. So similar to the LS-M3, at least on a moonless night, you're getting so much of that laser bouncing back that I'd say it's kind of overpowering. I'll narrow the illuminator some and see if it helps with that laser bloom, but it seems like it's just gonna be too much. So I will switch to illuminator only. And pretty clean illuminator. Definitely see that 500 yard target right now. I'll narrow it a little more for you. No problem. See the 500 yard target. I can even make out the steel targets to the right. Gonna definitely overpower at 100, let's go as wide as we can. On high illuminator only, here's your 50. Let's see how clean that illuminator is. A little bit of petri dish, but overall, pretty clean. And back to the 100 yard on the FL-5, Laserspeed FL-5. This one was getting pretty popular for a while because it was 150 bucks, and holy cow, I'm gonna need to turn that PVS-14 gain down. Yeah, it's washing out everything. Let's turn this PVS-14 gain down. So gain is down almost all the way, and this thing is just absolutely washing things out. It's too much. Let's see. I will turn the PVS-14 down completely. All right. I can't turn the gain down any more than that. And the SMS laser is still borderline overpowering things. It's pretty nuts. I guess it's kind of usable now. Your gain turned down all the way. Laser is actually relatively well balanced, but this thing is just a massive floodlight. So, I mean, what you see is where the illuminator's going because the gain is completely down on a completely pitch black night. So if you can make any targets out, it's because it is actually kind of reaching the 500 yards, just a little bit. And again, gain down all the way. So you could turn it up a little bit, but then you're probably gonna auto gate anything up close. Yeah, this thing has ridiculous output. I'm actually kind of surprised. I think it's gonna be a little too much because it is basically a flood, and anything up close, it's just gonna absolutely annihilate and wash out. But here you go, SMS laser. This is the cheapest sample on the lineup. I wanted to represent the ultra budget ends if you're just getting started and you just need something temporary. Although it seems like some people have had decent success with these. This thing just might do it. And for reference, here's what you guys are looking at. I mean, basically what my eyes see right now, just absolute darkness. This thing lights up the entire range. I was not expecting this, but here you go. So there's the 100, 200, 300. I can just barely make out the 400 and just barely make out the 500. Okay, up next is the Perst 3, and it is an absolute spotlight. This is as wide as it's gonna get. Once again, I'm gonna have to turn down this PVS-14 gain so I'm not washing out the illuminator that I'm trying to show. So, there you go. There's 100. I mean, I can see the 500, even the steel on the 500 without even starting to narrow this illuminator. So it does not get very wide. I would bet it gets pretty darn narrow though. Just a hunch. It's the first time playing with the Perst 3. So yeah, it does narrow pretty good. So 100, 200, 300, 400, and 500. Even with the gain turn down, it's totally washing out the 50, to be expected. Let's see if what other modes this thing's got. So that's laser only. What's this one do? Guess it's off. It is. All right, so here's dual. I'll widen it. Lasers. Definitely not co-lines, maybe. It's got one of those things where the illuminator kind of shifts as you rotate it. So there's dual for the Perst 3. It is just a very, very strong unit. So let's see what happens when I put this diffuser. So there's the Perst 3 with the illumination diffuser on. Laser is definitely not going to be balanced now. So diffuser kind of works out to about 100 yards with how we have the gain set, because it's just so strong. I would definitely try to get a diffuser for the laser, personally. But there you have it. Go illuminator only again. See how much the Perst 3 narrows. I guess it's going to become a laser. Yep, pretty much. And completely overpowering. So there's the 500 yard targets, steel targets. I can make them out. There's the 400, the 500. So yeah, very, very strong unit, that's for sure. All right, this is the LMD pistol enhancer. So it has pretty much one mode, which is going to be an IR flood with a little bit of a hotspot, and then that laser. I'm going to turn the gain down because I think we're getting a little bit of washout. So I think it's probably usable to maybe 150 yards. Laser is a little strong, but not terrible. With no moon tonight, you're going to get a bunch of that bounce back. So I'm going to keep saying that, depending on, you might have been skipping around this video, so apologize if you're watching it all the way through. But for those that are skipping around, just want to let them know that this laser is going to be a little exaggerated when it's as dark as it is. Overall, for how small and compact and lightweight this unit is, I think it puts out a pretty good amount of output, if I'm being honest. So here's the 50 yard target. It's definitely intended for close range, and I'd say 100 yards in, it's great. You can kind of see the illumination it's giving out to 200. I can see the 300 yard target. I can make out the 500 and the 400. So there you go, LMD pistol enhancer. Okay, so now we're transitioning into illuminators only. For a baseline, here is your Surefire Scout M600V. You can definitely see the 100 yard target. Here's without. No problem there. Here's the 50 yard. So you do kind of get that spot with a decent amount of flood as well. I would say it maybe gives you decent visibility out to that 300 yard mark. Definitely drops off in terms of how much it's actually contributing at that 400 and 500 yard target that I'm currently aiming at. So Surefire M600V. Here's your 100 yard range. So that backstop on the right is a 4x8, and then all these other big black squares are also 4x8s, except for that one. That one's not. But it's a 4x8 with the targets on it, just for reference on what we're looking at here. So Surefire Scout. Here's the Surefire M952V. A little bit older version. It actually looks like it has a better illumination pattern than my more updated 600V. So 100 yard, 200, maybe a little bit of use to 300, and I don't think it's really helping much beyond 300 yards. All right, Inforce WML. absolute flood. Lights up everything in close proximity. But I think past 100, it's really not contributing too much. And with how wide this is, it's going to absolutely auto-gate your tubes to your immediate environment. So that background that's darker, I don't think you're going to get a lot of benefit. But if you need something for up close, I mean, this has essentially 4 little IR LEDs, and it is absolutely flooding and lighting up the entire environment in front of me. But definitely not a long range tool at all. 50-yard target. This does not have a reflector. It's basically a little LED. I expected it to be on par with the PVS-14 Illuminator. And for reference, here is what the PVS-14 Illuminator does. Not a whole lot. So I stand corrected. It is more useful than that. Definitely a dead spot in the middle. But for this being a tiny little LED, it looks like it can almost punch out to 200 yards. It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be at 100. An absolutely awful illumination pattern. But if it was between this or nothing at all, I would definitely choose this. So I would recommend this for like a 75-yard in, but it looks like you're getting a little bit of utility out to 100 yards for the Streamlight TLR-VIR1. Way too strong without the diffuser up close. We will put that diffuser on. This is the 3-degree version. More than enough punch for 100. There's the 200, 300, 400 on the left, and you can make out the 500-yard targets, both that backstop and the steel targets. So for such a small unit, this is currently being run on a single CR123 cell. This little guy packs a lot of punch. So if you're looking for the smallest standalone illuminator that'll get you out to 500 yards, this might just be it. Here's the diffuser. I would say very useful for that 50-yard stand right there. But it does drop off pretty quick. We're getting a little bit of illumination at 100. I would think that it's actually probably going to auto-gate your tube with how wide it is and not really get you that punch out very far. So not very useful past 100, if it was even useful at 100 with that diffuser, but very, very good out to 500 yards. Even though it's not super tight, you can definitely see the surroundings all around that 500-yard target area. And 400 on the left, 500 to the right, and obviously 100 yards behind it. Pretty impressive. Okay, next is going to be the 3E. Up next is the 3E IR Vulcan. Very, very strong at that 50. Notice you do get a spot and quite a bit of flood. Seems more powerful than that Kiji. You can absolutely see the 500. But notice how the foreground is also pretty well lit up. So the entire environment is actually very well lit with this Vulcan. It's about the size of a Surefire vampire head, so not super big. But overall, very impressive. You can absolutely see both the, I mean, pretty much all the targets from 300 to 500 there. It's about 100-yard width between those two. Let's go ahead and put the diffuser on this. And not too bad. Diffuser drops off by about 100 yards. You get a little bit, definitely not a whole lot to offer beyond that. So it's really for the closer ranges. So here's nothing. And here is the Vulcan with the diffuser. Okay, so here is the Kiji on the left and the Vulcan on the right. So BE Meyers Kiji 3 degree on the left and the 3E IR Vulcan on the right. So I would say they both have pretty much the same punch. We're gonna go ahead and go straight to that 500-yard target. Kiji illuminates it great, so does the Vulcan, but the one thing that I'm noticing right out of the gate is that the Vulcan seems to not only have a similar hotspot as the Kiji, but it's flooding a little bit more of my environment in the foreground. So Kiji, a little bit of flood, kind of bouncing around. Vulcan with quite a bit more flood. Okay, so we have a prototype Z-bolt illuminator and no issues with going down to the 500 yards. So this is somewhat representative of their upcoming ACAL that everyone is excited about. They did tell me that the ACAL should have an improved optic over this prototype head that I'm using here, although it looks pretty stupid clean to me and very, very bright. They said that the ACAL will actually have a better assembly to make it even cleaner. Looks like there's a little bit of a dead spot there. Maybe that's what we can expect to be improved. But output wise, I mean, this thing is very bright and very clean. So it does converge and diverge. A little bit bigger than a Surefire head, but that's the trade-off when you actually want to have a clean illuminator that has such a wide and narrow convergence and divergence. This is very useful, honestly. Pretty much lights up the whole range and very well, if I might add. So again, this is the stand-in prototype head for what looks to be their upcoming ACAL. And we also have what is not a prototype. This is the Z-bolt Blazer. And we also have what is not a prototype. This is the Z-bolt Blazer. There's 100 yards. So quickly becomes overpowering. It's very, very strong. There aren't different brightness modes that I can toggle, at least with the Surefire body I have this on. I don't believe that's a thing for these. Here's as narrow as it gets, so not quite as narrow, but I can still make out the 500-yard target no problem. I can see both that black backboard and the steel targets to the right of it. Now it's interesting because when I go full wide, you see how there's a little bit of spill, but if I narrow just a little bit, that flood kind of reduces all the way out. You see how that foreground lights up? So it's interesting there. So you kind of get even wider than the main concentrated beam on the Z-bolt Blazer. Okay, This is the Armasight Watchman, and it gets pretty much as wide as the field of view of this PVS-14. This is another V-cell illuminator. So even on wide, I can kind of make out that 200-yard target. Now the cool thing about the Watchman IR is that it has 3 power modes, and it is completely focusable to what I believe is a 4-degree beam. So even on low, I mean, just absolutely stupid bright. No problem concentrating. And when I say low, I mean, I have 2 more settings. So this thing, honestly, if you wanted to use a clip-on device and go out to 1,000 yards, no problem. I'm washing out at 500 yards on this. So what I will do, let's go wide. It's a pretty clean illuminator, and we'll do wide and high. And there you go, boom, entire range, 100 yards all the way out to 500 being completely illuminated without issue, with the added range and features. So this one definitely goes the widest of all the illuminators, full frame of the PVS-14 essentially, and brighter than this gain level can handle. Again, Armasight Watchman IR, V-cell based, dedicated illuminator. Okay, so I want to also give you guys some comparisons on what these things look like with photonic barriers. It also kind of bothered me with how muddy the night vision footage looked because it's pitch black out here. So we have lights set up on the range just to show you what you would potentially be up against when you're depending on these illumination tools to illuminate dark spots when there's barriers in the way. So we have lights shining even on the 50. We're gonna start with the civilian A3 just to show you why the civ lasers are gonna be kind of out of the running here. So let's see. I'm surprised that you see this as much as you do at 50, 100, not a whole lot, and then beyond that, they're gonna kind of drop. So here's the A3, and that is why I'm only going to show all the brighter ones that we've tested so far in this video, and we're not gonna go through every single illuminator that I showed in complete darkness. So in no particular order, here is the PEQ15, L3 PEQ15. I'm gonna try to be as quick as I can be going through these. So no problem. Also, we're just going straight to high now because we're trying to punch through photonic barriers. No problem at all. Still getting to the 500 yards. To be expected. 100 yards. Punching straight through. All that. Okay. All right, here's the spot mode on the MAWL. No problem. So in complete darkness, it's kind of easy to wash stuff out. With different ambient photonic barriers, I feel like it kind of tames down these devices. So we're not getting laser bloom on this MAWL. It is a civ MAWL, so that could be why. But all in all, makes this a lot more usable. I can completely see that 500-yard target. I can see the 400 just fine. I could even plink steel here at 300 yards if I really, really wanted to. I mean, the 2x2 500-yard target is completely visible to my eye. I can put the laser on it. Not too bad there. Let's do this. Here's that kind of medium flood. Not getting as much punch. Not really having an effect past that 100. I don't see much difference at the 200 personally. Okay, here's the Bigpeqs15. I know it's a clone, but it is just so stupid bright. I wanted to show how this thing does with photonic barriers on the range, so I can still very, very much illuminate that 500-yard target going through that spotlight that I got shining down range. And I don't have these things cranked up. I'm not trying to damage my tubes or anything, but not a problem illuminating things that already have lights around it with the Bigpeqs15 either. Here's the L3 NGAL on wide. A lot of these should be no surprise in terms of the illuminator working as you would hope. So 500 yards, clearly distinguishable. Let's see what happens when we go to dual high. See if it kind of helps tame that laser bloom we were seeing in the pitch black. Maybe a little bit, not a whole lot. Let's put that diffuser over the laser. And now it's just between, you know, the diffuser and the photonic barriers being introduced to the range, just a much more usable unit. So now, you know, if you're in an environment where you don't necessarily have time to change the divergence of an illuminator, you can see here at 50 yards with realistic photonic barriers in place, the high illumination is now more usable, kind of levels the playing field, and you can still use it to light up at 500 yards. So there's the L3 NGAL. Here's the Laserspeed LS-M3. I honestly felt like this was on par with the FL-5. Probably use similar components. I wanted to see how much this thing still blooms. I think it's improved with photonic barriers in place, but still a very, very bright laser. You can see we're now not really illuminating as much on the 500-yard range like we were when it was completely dark. But let's go to illuminator only, and we still can narrow and illuminate quite well. Get plenty of punch there. Obviously the 300, 200, and still can drastically overpower the 100. Okay, we're going to be looking at the Raid X next. Here's the Raid X. Start on wide. I still have the aiming laser set to low. No problem punching through on that silhouette. 100 looks pretty good. 200, 300. Let's narrow down on the 500. And still pretty usable to 500 even with lights being introduced. It's a very, very usable for the Raid X. Here's the IR-V. Packing a lot of punch at 100 yards. I don't want to change the gain on the PVS-14 to try to stay as consistent as possible on this part of the video. So obviously you could dial it down, but still illuminates at 500. No issues with those photonic barriers in place. Laser is incredibly balanced. No diffuser, but it looks great. Bright without excessive bloom to where you can't precisely aim. And let's see how the diffuser looks. 50 over the illuminator. No diffuser. Diffuser. Sorry, no illumination. That's just the light we have shining downrange now. Dim light, but still light. And there you go. DIR-V, the 3EIR DIR-V. Say that 3 times fast. That's 200 yards, 300, 4, and 5. It's working well enough. I see a skunk that's made its way out of the range where the laser is. As much as I would like to get rid of that guy, that is frowned upon. I'm not supposed to be doing shooting out here and not at animals at this gun club. So there's a skunk. There you go. I can identify things with the IR-V. There's the DBAL D2. No surprises here. Very, very clean illumination. Punching through to the 500. No issues. See with the diffuser, still kind of lighting up the environment. Pretty solid. The DBAL A2. Didn't expect this one to have much of a challenge for a full power laser. And it still punches through. .500-yard targets, still nice and visible. Can focus that beam to a laser, so to be expected. Go as wide as this can go. There you go. The DBAL A2. All right, the Perst 3 was quite the laser earlier. So I'm curious with photonic barriers if it's going to kind of tame this thing down. Notice how that illuminator walks all over. Laser's not moving. It's the illuminator moving relative to the laser. So this is as wide as it gets. It's still really, really overpowered. I think the bloom on the laser is a little better now that we have lights kind of downrange. This thing is just an absolute sun. Super bright. So something to be aware of if you're going for a Perst 3. Outrageously strong illumination. Very concentrated. Doesn't get very wide, but it's doing its job. And I'd say with realistic photonic barriers, that laser is now somewhat usable. Not quite as crazy of a bloom as earlier in the pitch black. All right, PEQ 2. Honestly, one of my favorite of the group. Absolutely usable with ambient lights. To be expected. Let's go all the way wide. Very clean illuminator. By the way, I keep moving my camera just so I don't have a bright spot in the same spot on the night vision tube, guys. So if that's annoying you, I'm sorry, but that's why I'm doing it. So very usable. This is high illumination, low laser. This will crank that laser to high, and you do still get blooming with how strong the laser is on this. So there's low laser, so pretty nice unit. Look up close, the wider pattern, the PEQ 2. This is laser on low, but now we're at 50 yards. Here's going to be the BE Meyers Kiji. Still very capable of illuminating the 500-yard targets with those photonic barriers introduced. No issues at all. Let's see with the diffuser. So the close range diffuser, it's contributing a little bit, but I have a flashlight pointed towards that 50-yard target. It is on a low output mode, so with my naked eye, I actually can barely see the 50-yard target for reference, but it's kind of taken away the effect of the diffuser, although the diffuser is still doing something. At 100 yards, diffuser isn't really contributing too much. At the Kiji, 3 degrees, the 3-degree Kiji. All right, the 3E IR Vulcan. Very, very strong output. Still lighting up 500 yards, punching through those photonic barriers just fine. No problems. See what the diffuser does. Now this diffuser, not quite as much effect with ambient light. Not contributing too much to that 100 yards with a dim light shining downrange. Kiji on left, Vulcan on the right. So BE Meyers 3-degree Kiji and the 3E IR Vulcan with photonic barriers on the range. They are pretty on par with each other. I will point out that the Kiji is more of a round illumination pattern that kind of drops off, and the Vulcan is more of a square looking pattern, just a little bit. But both can completely illuminate the 500-yard range just fine, as to be expected. Both very, very good units. All right, Z-Bolt ACAL prototype, representative stand-in, I should say. Still very, very clean, punches through all the photonic barriers on the range just fine. Let's narrow this guy. Plenty of power to punch through to the 500 yards. No real difference. Those barriers don't seem to really be blocking it. Still overpowers 100 yards even with lights kind of headed downrange. All right, now the big guns, the Watchman IR. So when it was pitch black, you could tell that it was flooding the whole view. And I guess you can still tell, even with all the photonic barriers. Here's high mode, but on low mode, can't tell quite as much. So let's go ahead and, this is medium power, narrowing. Yeah, we can pretty much wash out everything. No real surprise there. And just for fun, here's the high. So high mode still washing out a lot of things. Very, very powerful illuminator. Pretty effective. So rather than make you sit through the approximate 12 hours of data collection that I took for this video, I figured I'd show you the process one time very briefly so you can kind of visualize what I did. Obviously, taking weights of the units is pretty straightforward, But let's explain briefly what I had to do for the power metering and then when measuring the alignment and tracking of the laser diodes. So for power metering, for those that don't know, power meters typically have an 8mm diameter. So when it comes to measuring the actual laser, the laser fits within that 8mm orifice at a point blank range. What I was sure to do is actually make sure the meter was set for the proper wavelength of the vis laser or the IR laser or IR illuminator to get an accurate reading. Now sometimes this data wasn't available, more so on the IR spectrum, and I used a value of 830, which is pretty common. Now keep in mind a lot of these diodes have a tolerance of 830 plus or minus 20, so putting it at 830 should keep us within an acceptable range. Now when it comes to the illuminator, that got a little bit tricky. You'll see in the data table that I had to calculate some of these values that did not fit within an 8mm diameter. So what I did is, knowing the obvious surface area of that sensor, which would be fully saturated at point blank range, I then calculated what the actual pattern was by taking a pair of calipers with night vision and measuring that illumination pattern at point blank range. And then I just compared the area of the sensor to what was measured and gave you a calculated output. Would that sensor be big enough to capture the whole pattern? For the alignment offset data, what I did is mounted the units to a large block of wood that was clamped down in place. I marked the visible laser at a 10-yard distance. I then switched it to IR, marked the IR laser location, then switched it back to the vis setting so that I could verify the visible laser hadn't moved at all from the first marked location, to verify that me toggling the switches didn't cause any shifts or skewed the data in any way. If the vis laser remained in the same place, I then took a vertical and horizontal measurement to see how much the lasers were separated from the physical separation distance of the diodes. So I did keep into account that the laser diodes physically are not stacked on top of each other, and these values represent how much more divergence there potentially was from those locations. The tracking offset data was taken similarly in that the units were mounted to a block. Measurements were taken at 10 yards, initially marking where the visible laser started. I made 30 adjustments in the elevation direction, 30 adjustments in the windage direction. I then repeated those adjustments in the equal and opposite direction and made a second mark if it was different than the initial mark. If it did differ, I took a measurement in the vertical and horizontal direction to let you know how much of a drift there potentially was, converted that into MO, which was easy to do at 10 yards. Once again, I have the actual measured value and then the calculated conversion to MOA in brackets. So I know that 1 inch is not exactly 1 MOA, but it is close enough for the purposes of this table. Some quick things I want to point out on this table is that the Blazer Z-Bolt doesn't have a high or a low mode, but I did notice different outputs between having just a single 3-volt battery and 2 3-volt batteries. So you can see here where I have calculated values versus actual measured values, which is true for any of these columns here. And then the Watchman IR has 3 power settings, so this bracket kind of slips into here. There's obviously not an alignment offset, but this is the calculated value of the Watchman IR, which came in at just under a watt, which was pretty crazy. Hopefully that's an accurate measurement. Their specs advertise a 600 milliwatt high power, so there may be some error in how I calculated that, but that is what I measured and calculated for that high setting. So we're going to do some speed dating with these laser units, for lack of a better way to describe it. This is not intended to be a comprehensive review or overview of these units, but I'm trying to give you a closer look at some of these, so again, you can evaluate what might be of most interest for you. Up first, we have the NGAL. So it's going to represent not only the real deal, because it is the real deal, but it's also going to represent the clones, because those clones are super accurate and the controls are the same. So you have your selector dial on top, nice and tactile. Your adjustments for both the illuminator and the lasers are these very, very small screws. On the front, you have your stacked vis and IR laser, and then you have your illuminator with the diffuser included. So this is the real L3 for those that are wondering if it's the clone or the real one. Based on that epoxy, it is the real deal. Pretty simple rail clamp on the bottom, recoil lugs. You have the divergence control on the illuminator right here. And then you do have a LA23 style plug and standard thread-on battery cap. Next we have your MAWL. So the MAWL has a mode selector on the front, so you can go to Vis and then flip all the way around, goes to IR. When it is on and has a battery in it, then these little LEDs on the side will glow. I think that's where it gets some of its parasitic drain. Currently I don't have the battery stored in this one. And you have different fire buttons, an A and a B button. A typically being the higher power mode, so depending on which position this little slider is in, you can go from short range, mid range, this depresses, and now you go to long range. So you have your different combination of functions. It does have 2 remote switch ports in the back. This built-in pressure pad basically is probably one of the biggest selling points, and it can be taken off and flipped, so it can be set up in either a right or left hand configuration, making the MAWL pretty modular. But you'll see it's still a fairly large unit. Now all the diodes shift with these screws that are built into the housing on the right side and on the underside. So that's how you would make the adjustments to your lasers. We have the Perst 3. You'll notice it's all in Russian because it is Russian. You have your different modes for laser only, IR, illumination only, and then the combination of the 2. You do have an actuation button on both the top and the rear of the unit. You also have a remote switch port. You do also have brightness control, so you can actually adjust up or down. Unfortunately, I forgot to play around with that in the visual demo. Sorry guys, these aren't my units. I'm not experts in all of them. So you have a pretty typical turret underneath the protective cap. Your battery is kind of interesting. It is on top and it is secured in place by these 2 set screws. It does have a diffuser on the front. You can see the 2 laser diodes are actually kind of diagonal to each other in this part of the housing. Illuminator on this side. It is adjustable somewhat for the divergence. It gets super narrow, but not insanely wide. Next up is the Holosun LS321G. It has a pretty standard switch on the back. You have your remote switch port here. So all your different modes. So again, most of these are Vis only, combination of IR, illumination, independent illumination. I actually like this dial to control the illumination divergence probably the best out of all of them. It actually feels like it's got some gears and teeth in there. It doesn't just, you feel that mechanical action going on inside there. So I do like it. It has some pretty good adjustment turrets here that are slightly recessed, so it's hard to bump and damage them. And it has a pretty positive actuation button on top. The lasers and illuminators are all contained in a single lens, so as far as ever being able to diffuse the lasers, you're not going to be able to do that without also diffusing the illuminator. The battery is retained in the front and has a rubber lanyard. It does have a pretty decent quick detach mount. First, you have to depress a button here, and then it opens for you and then locks back in place. It feels pretty beefy, and for the size, it's actually pretty heavy, but it honestly feels like it's built like a tank. It would be interesting to compare this to the titanium versions that are allegedly even more durable than this version, but this feels like it's made pretty good. This is the 3EIR IR-V. So it has a stacked visible and IR laser. It has this diffuser currently over the illumination diode, so it just pops in place and does a pretty good job. Has a pretty nice, this is the updated Arasaka version, pretty nice button, tactile, rubber feels good, and you have a pretty simplistic mode selector. So this one is a little bit more simplified. You either have a Vis laser, off, you can go to IR laser only, combination of the 2, and then illuminator only. The laser adjustments are made with an Allen key style set screw, and although it is a screw, it moves with quite a decent amount of force. I wouldn't be worried about this moving around or backing on you, and a little witness mark would serve to make sure visually that it hasn't moved, since there aren't any other indicators. Now, although this looks like some kind of plastic molded or 3D printed housing, I was pleasantly surprised to feel how durable and ultimately high quality this thing actually feels in the hand. So it feels pretty solid. It does not feel cheap at all. It feels pretty nice. And the best part is this unit is just stupid streamlined and low profile when mounted. There's not really a need for a remote switch because this sits at roughly the same height as a remote switch would. So huge perk to this unit. This is the Laserspeed LS-M3. You control the modes with high or low. You do have an LED indicator on the back, your mode selection, so your typical vis laser, independent IR laser, illuminator, combination of the two. Proprietary remote switch for this. It has capped turrets. Pretty standard stuff there. This one does have your stacked vis and IR laser on one side with its own adjustments, and then the illuminator on the opposite side with adjustments as well. The convergence and divergence are controlled by turning the unit forward. The battery is on the front of this unit, and the mount is compatible with, and the mount can be a standard cross-bolt locking or a quick detach configuration. Slightly different, but also somewhat similar to the Laserspeed LS-M3 is their FL-5. This one has a white light on one side, so it then combines the stacked lasers on the other side and the illuminator on the other side. Now, the illuminator divergence on this is controlled with a rear dial. The battery is rear mounted, and this uses an 18650 cell rather than a CR123. So I would believe that you'll get a little bit more punch and juice out of this compared to if they would have used a CR123 style housing. The high and low modes are on a separate dial, and then the mode selection is on this front dial. Actuation feels pretty decent. Not super clicky, not super loud, but it still is tactile enough. Next, we have your classic PEQ15. So your mode selector is on the right-hand side. Very tactile. You definitely know when it's moving. Your actuation is on top. Not very loud, not overly tactile. You definitely know when it's being pressed though. Battery cap in the rear, remote switch port in the rear as well. You have co-aligned lasers, but they are mounted at an angle, and then you have your illuminator on the opposite side, and it spins roughly a turn and a half to fully diverge or converge. The mount on this is pretty simple, just a straight cross-bolt mechanism. Now, very similar to the PEQ15 is going to be these two clones, other than the difference is that these are actually LA5B clones. So the main difference is that the illuminator has a dial that you can make adjustments, whereas the PEQ15, you need a screw for those. And the illumination adjustments on all three of these, you have independent adjustments of the lasers as well as the illuminators. And they all have the same mount. The LMD pistol enhancer is a pretty nice little unit. You have actuation on the left or right hand side. If you press and hold, it's momentary. A single tap keeps it on. Very simple. The green selector puts it on IR. Now it only has an IR laser. So when it's in that mode, you're always gonna have the laser on with the IR illumination. The white is going to be white only. So very small, compact unit, and actually has a decent amount of output for its size. The DBAL A3 has a stacked vis and IR laser on one side. On the opposite side, it's going to have your IR illuminator. The illuminator diverges or converges by twisting. It only has about a quarter turn on that range, and then each set of illumination tools are independently adjusted with some exposed turrets that are slightly recessed into the actual housing to protect those turrets. On the rear, you have your remote switch ports The A3 has a vis override, meaning that if you have a compatible switch, regardless of the mode, you'll get your visible laser. You can see you have your mode selector to the left of it. Many options, including both low power and high power options for both vis only, IR laser only, and illuminator only. The DBAL A3 does have a built-in quick detach mount, which I find to be pretty decent. Some people have their own opinions on that, but it does sit somewhat lower than the unit to where this thing is going to get a little bit of an air gap in between the unit and the rail that you mount it to, which is why they are compatible with what you see on it. A leaf sight, it's going to roughly be the height you need to use this as a front sight if you want to add that accessory. So this leaf sight is not included, but an optional aftermarket accessory for the DBAL style devices. Now, very similar to the DBAL A3 is going to be the DBAL A2. You'll notice that it actually has different style turrets. So these are the kind of the older generation DBAL style turrets, and they are pretty tactile. They click. You have your actuation button on top, similar to the A3. You only have a single port in the back. You don't have that remote, or you do not have that vis override, but you do have two separate switches. One is for high, low, or constant power. The other is going to be all your different actuation combinations, so vis only, IR laser only, illuminator only, etc. You have a stacked vis and IR laser on one side, and on the other side you have your illuminator, which diverges or converges by twisting. This one has a much larger convergence and divergence range than the DBAL A3, and the A2, as far as I am aware, is only made in full power versions. They do not make a civilian powered A2. The battery is mounted in the front, similar to the A3, and overall they have almost identical footprints and mounts. The DBAL D2 is going to be a civilian powered LED-based illumination device. You have a very large illuminator on one side, which converges or diverges by, once again, twisting it. The Villain Weapon Systems diffuser is a very popular accessory that really helps you get the most out of this device, and that is what currently is installed. Similar to the other Steiner devices, you have a stacked visible and IR laser, a front-mounted battery, and then you do have exposed turrets as well. On the rear, you do have a single switch that'll let you do low power, high power, and then also decide if you want individual or a combination of the illuminators on. You have a crane compatible remote switch port, and then your actuation button is actually kind of here on the rear, that big bell shaped. Now, this is pretty useful for a right-handed shooter because it's going to be right where your thumb index is on the handguard. You're kind of out of luck if you are a left-handed shooter. It does use the typical Steiner quick detach mount as well. But when it comes to the D2, it is a pretty large unit. And by large, I mean she thick. Now, speaking of large, we have the PEQ2. The PEQ2 is going to be an IR laser only and IR illuminator only, so it's completely an IR device. This one has a LaRue quick detach mount. It is powered with two AA batteries, and you have the very useful mode selectors, which includes illuminator high with laser low. So it makes it very, very useful, and actually the illuminator on this was very, very clean. So it's very big, but it's a very high quality illumination tool. Up next is going to be the updated Raid Xe, although this is the low power civilian version. So you'll notice on the front you have your co-lined lasers on the bottom, and then your main IR illuminator there, and then you also have an IR flood, so a closer range and lower power just flood illuminator. You have essentially what's like a PEQ15 style selector switch on top that is similar in function and feel to the PEQ15. Your turrets are somewhat recessed into the housing. Speaking of housings, the bulk of it feels like some kind of cast aluminum, and the top is a polymer construction. On the rear is where you control the divergence or convergence of the IR illuminator. You do also have a screen, so when it is powered on, it tells you the exact mode that you're in. So when you are in the dark, you can kind of get a better feel for that without having to try to feel around on the switch. Now, this is the up position. You can put this down to block it, and then there's also kind of like a third position, which kind of gives you like a little hood around it, so it limits the amount of light that might be shining around. Now there is a light sensor, so you can make this to where it'll adjust brightness for you. On top is a light sensor and your actuation button. You also notice that you have some other function control buttons. For example, these will allow you to toggle the laser brightness, or you can also use it to switch from that close range to long range illuminator. There is a proprietary connection for a remote switch. It looks to be magnetic. I don't currently have it with this loaned unit, so I can't speak too much to that. Now the battery cap is worth mentioning because it's different than all the other battery caps in that it's basically a little quarter turn. It has a different locking mechanism than just normal threads. So of course Wilcox had to be fancy there too. And then the mount is a double crossbar mount, each serving as a recoil lug, but also a redundancy in terms of trying to avoid or alleviate failure points. Currently there's the rubber cover, but a hard cover is also included. So you can choose which one at your discretion. Okay, we have the BE Meyers 3-degree Kiji with a 10-degree diffuser on top, which is very satisfying to just pop to the side like such. This is going to be a V-cell based illuminator. Very, very compact, probably the most compact of what we're showing you for the, especially when you talk about the actual output power of this. Very useful, and it can be powered with something as small as this little single 3-volt Surefire body. So obviously you can kind of change up the switches, and if you want to use remote ports, because it is a Surefire compatible thread pitch on the head. Very similar to the BE Meyers is going to be the 3EIR Vulcan. So this is another V-cell based illuminator that is standalone. It can work on both a single CR123 or a dual CR123 Surefire housing, or Surefire body. It also has a diffuser that can just switch over it. Very compact, very powerful, and another very useful illumination tool. Up next is going to be the Z-Bolt Blazer. Now the Z-Bolt Blazer is once again a very, very strong and useful LED-based illumination tool. You'll notice that the bezel is a little bit bigger than that of a typical Surefire bezel, but that is because you can actually control the divergence and convergence on this one, unlike the other illuminator heads that I showed earlier. So you're trading off for a little bit more size, you actually can control the range, and this has a very impressive range on this, as was shown in the other parts of the video. Now the same is true of the prototype head that I showed you guys, which is going to be more representative of their ACAL that is coming up, but they said that they expect to improve the optic clarity even further than this on the upcoming unit. So this was kind of a stand-in prototype head to show you their V-cell based illumination. This is the Insight WML. The battery is stored in the front, so this front head unscrews, and then the modes are toggled like that, with your actuation being on the rear by just pressing it. Mount is built into the body as well. I'm sure this is a device many of you guys will be familiar with, and it is the Surefire M600V. So you change your outputs by twisting that head, so you can go in a white mode, off, or all the way over to IR. Obviously you can play around with different combinations of switches, ports, plugs, etc. Going a little bit more old school was the Surefire M952V. Built-in quick detach mount. This one does come with both a Surefire port as well as a clicky switch. This is pretty much the configuration you'll get, and similar to the M600V, you just kind of rotate the head to go to the mode that you want to be in, either white or IR. There is no off on this one. Quite a bit larger than the M600V. It is about 12 to 15 years older than the newer 600Vs. And then we have the Armasight Watchman, which is going to be a V-cell illumination tool. This one has a super big divergence and convergence range, the absolute largest of what I've showed you, but that is once again kind of a trade-off for the size, because to adjust it, you just basically move the lens assembly by twisting the body. So this goes as tight as a 4-degree, essentially laser beam, and can completely flood your entire area when put in all the way. So it has a pretty useful and efficient lens assembly. Clicky cap that does turn red when it's on if there were a battery installed, and this cap can be swapped for a remote switch as well. Standard 1-inch body, so 1-inch mounts of any form factor or variety will work to let you mount this. So I hope you found this video very useful. If there are questions, which this may spark a lot of questions, or even if you want to be like, hey, I'm thinking about Unit A versus Unit B, what was your personal experience? Because looking through these digitally, there's going to be a lot of, clarity lost through the camera, then YouTube compression. I'd be happy to share as many insights as I possibly can. Obviously, not everyone gets to sample these all at once. It was a lot of fun to do so. Again, shout out to the companies and the people that were behind making this possible. I cannot thank you guys enough. I'm really happy to put in the time and effort to put this together, and I'm just hoping to do this to benefit the good of the community. So that's pretty much it. I'm not trying to make this video any longer than it's already going to be. I want to thank you sincerely for stopping by and for the time spent watching this video. Please do consider subscribing so we can get the subscriber count up, so it's more likely that companies will send me more gear so I can only produce bigger and better videos for you guys. So that's all I have for you on this one. As always, have a good one.